Hi, good morning. Salam, peace. This is Rashid Hassan again. I wanted to have a conversation with you. As you have seen the previous video, which was basically introduction to my series, removing the middleman. And what I would like to do going forward is every week select a couple of verses from the Qur'an and then basically provide some discussion, understanding as I can see it, and really this is to provide some thoughts, to spark some discussion and debate. And my job is not to provide a complete answers to any of the issues that are there. It's more about giving you a summary, a synopsis, and then to help you do the same on your own. And it's only through collective conversation, discussion, we can get to the right understanding, as opposed to one individual providing all the answers that there is. And that's the fallacy that I think we've been for quite a long time. And it's important that all of you, those who are professional Muslims, educated, that you take it as your responsibility to dig into the Quran and into faith, into goodness, and see how we get inspired by this book of Revelation, but also the books of human sciences that has been ever expanding as we are moving into this 21st century. With that, today we're going to talk about Surah Fatiha, as you all know, especially those who are Muslim. That's the first chapter of the Quran. The Quran has 114 chapters of various length, and they were revealed over 23 years. So it's a collection of revelation that came to Prophet Muhammad over a 23-year period, and they've been organized and put together pretty much from the day the Prophet was receiving those. His followers were very diligent and deliberate in collecting those, and within 10 years of his death, everything was put together in its final form. Now, interesting thing of the Quran is that it's in a reverse chronology, meaning that the Quran that exists today, the earlier revelation is at the back end of the Quran. Even the Surah Fatiha, which is the opening chapter, was probably revealed sometime later, but not necessarily the last one or the first one. And I'll get to some of those conversations later on in the series. So if I look at Surah Fatiha, which is 7 verses, it is also referred to as the 7 most repeated verses, perhaps of any book in the world. Every Muslim who prays on a daily basis recites this chapter a number of times in each prayer, and given that there are 5 prayers on a day, it gets repeated many, many times. It is the first surah or chapter that every Muslim child learns to memorize. So it's really something that those words are really something very much ingrained in the mind and psyche of Muslims, and should also be in the mind of those who claim to have faith and goodness in their sense of purpose of life. One interesting thing about this surah, I mean, if you were to read it, there's not a single word of Islam or Muslim in it. It is all about attributes, pledges, and commitments to God and to ourselves. And I think it's with that kind of a mindset I want to get into some conversation about the actual verses. It is, in some sense, you could say, those of us who write long essays or theses, it's really the abstract or the executive summary of the Quran. And it is all about faith and not about religion per se. And I think there is this dichotomy as far as how we define faith versus religion. Religion I define more in terms of practices, whether you go to the mosque or the church or the synagogue or temple. You practice religion, but when you have conversation about God and about human goodness, whether it's in the mosque, in the temple, or in the public square, I think we're talking about faith, and that's, I think, what it's all about. In that sense, if you read the Surah Fatiha, this chapter, it is really religion neutral, or another way to say it, it encompasses all religions in terms of true faith and human commitment to God and to ourselves, and to be guided by a set of priorities in our lives. And I think that's what really the beauty of this chapter. And In many of my interfaith conversation, I have always shared this chapter, and I don't think people of various religious affiliation had any issues with this surah, because it's such a foundational set of ideas and thoughts that anybody who has got faith and who believe in human dignity and human purpose could, but not agree with all the parts of it. So let me just first say the surah itself in English, and then I'll get into some discussion. As you also know, for those who obviously recite this Quran and in Arabic, that every surah is preceded by a statement, which basically says, "In the name of God, the most merciful, most compassionate." And also, at the beginning of any recitation of the Quran, it is recommended that you also seek refuge in God from the devil or from anything that is evil, whether it's outside or inside of us. So this surah basically says all praises belong to God, God Almighty, the God of the universe, most merciful, most kind, and He is the Lord of the Day of Judgment. O God, it is You that you worship, and it is You that you ask for help. May You guide us on the straight path, the path of those who have been blessed by You, and to keep away from the path of those who have gone astray and have caused God's displeasure. So that's essence what this surah is all about. So when I look at this surah, I see three key components in it. First is about God Himself. By the way, God, the word God in Arabic is Allah. It's a word that doesn't have any gender, or it's a singular word. It's not, there's no plural to this word, and it really comes from the root words, which means someone worthy of worship. So in that sense, God is also mentioned as Allah by Christians and Jews who speaks the language of Arabic. So it's really not about any particular God of any particular religion. It's really God, the universal, the sovereign, who is the creator of the universe and who gave the guidance of the Quran, the Torah, the Bible, and many other books of various faiths that exist today, including, I would assume, Hinduism and Buddhism and many that has been forgotten. There's this tradition in Islamic faith that God had sent about 120,000 prophets throughout the ages. And so every community, every generation have been the benefit of God's guidance from those prophets. And obviously the last few prophets, we all know, the very last one being the Prophet Muhammad, and then we have Prophet Jesus, we've got Prophet Moses, Prophet Abraham, and many, many other biblical prophets have been mentioned in the Torah, in the Bible, and in the Quran, of course. So this surah, the very first few verses, is really about the essence of God. Then it's about our own yearning, our pledge to God. And the last one is our commitment, our need for God's guidance. So in that sense, I think it is very universal. Any person of faith, whoever believes in God and believes in human purpose, I think will connect with those three segments. So in the first one, God is described as the one who is the cherisher, sustainer of the universe. And the word is used, it's called Rabb in Arabic, which is, in many classical translation have been referred to as Lord. I would rather use the word which really comes from the act of sustainment, act of cherishment, that God cherishes us, God sustains us, this universe, this ecosystem that is part of our existence. So in that sense, God is the cherisher, and He is the cherisher of the entire universe that is in place when we're a very tiny part of that. And there are many, many other people, I would assume, or creation that might exist that we don't know at this point, but I suspect if we exist, there's no reason why to believe that there couldn't be other civilizations and entities and species that might exist in other planets. And just like in our own planets, we've got many, many different species. Even in the history of evolution, there has been many, many human species, we being, I suspect, the last one or the one that is today, and we don't really know. what's to come. The second attribute of God is the mercy, that He is merciful, Ar-Rahman and Rahim. I think those two words have a common root, Rahma, the mercy. And the Prophet in his tradition described that the first word is more about God's mercy. The second one is more about the attributes of mercy that God had endowed in every single creatures. And that by that I mean not just living creatures. I mean the trees and the plants, the mountains and the rivers all have a sense of mercy and compassion built in them. And then that God is the Lord of the day of judgment, that He is the owner, this construct of accountability, that all of us are accountable, and that's pretty much a reflection of how we have built our own social construct, right? We all have to work. We are accountable. We aren't living because we're committed to our families, our children. We help each other because we're accountable for one another. So this sense of accountability is very much a part of our construct as we build it, but also it's a part of the construct of the entire universe. And certainly the presence of the day of judgment, which is a fundamental part of belief, it also implies that we have to assume and believe that we're accountable to God, just like we're accountable to one another. And the purpose of life has to be defined in terms of this accountability, which is very universal. So that's basically a set of statements about God and about our own existence and the purpose and the connection between God and us. The second part is really about our own pledge to God, that we will worship God. By worship, we mean serve God, but as you all know, serving God really means serving people. And that's, I think, is very, very important. The Prophet had always said that, for you to serve God, you have to serve people. And there are many, many interesting hadiths, the tradition of the Prophet, where we know that God even would ask people on the Day of Judgment that how did we serve God? And we will probably say, well, God, how can you serve me? You are the God of the universe. God will say that if you had served people, if you had fed a poor person, you have taken care of a sick individual, if you had helped an oppressed individual, if you had spoken the truth, if you had ensured justice, those are all ways to serve God. And that is to serve people. So that's important. And the second one is that we ask God's help. God's help, because we know our limitation. We know that we have deficient in our deficiency. We have lack of knowledge, lack of ability, but we have a will. We have a freedom to choose, and we have a desire and aspiration that is always to be aligned with God, to lead a life that is meaningful, that is purposeful, and we wish to ask God's help. So that's also a pledge we make to God, that we ask your help to help us, knowing that we have limitations, we understand our deficiencies, and we wish to augment our ability with God's help and His guidance to be able to fulfill our obligation to serve God, and to serve people, because by serving people, we serve God. And the third one is basically commitment. When we say, what a yearning or a set of expectation from God that, God help us to be on the straight path, and the path that is straight. It's the word is Surah al-Mustaqim. It's a path of Abraham. It's a path of Moses, path of Jesus. It's a path that all the prophets have defined consistently. And I think I challenge everyone to read the Qur'an, the Torah, the Bible, and other books of Revelation, and really look at the essence of faith and human goodness. You will see that those exist in all of those books. And that makes sense, because why would a God who has sent the prophets through ages to this human species to provide His guidance, why would it be contradictory? Why would it be conflicting? The context might change. The way we implement the values and the principle might change, but the essence of it should not really change. And I think that's amply justified and evident as you read various books of Revelations, old and the new. So this path, the straight path, the path of faith and path of goodness, is the straight path, is the least difficult way in one sense to get to um, the human purpose. On the other hand, it's also very difficult because it requires discipline, it requires commitment, it requires a constant awareness of who we are and how we conduct our day-to-day life and our longer-term visions and aspirations, how we build society, how do we interact with one another, how do you earn a living. All of those things are tied in a very common thread of this straight path. And it's a path that we wish to follow. It's a path of those whom God has blessed and whom God is pleased with. And we know God is always pleased with those who subscribe to the truth, subscribe to human goodness, and who aspire and dedicate their lives and their pursuits for the betterment of humanity. And that we want to stay away from the path of those who have been promoting falsehood, lack of belief, purpose that is driven by evil and hate. Those are not the kind of path that you want to follow. So we are asking God to help us avoid those paths. But as you all know, that when you yearn something, when you want to make a pledge or aspire a need, it is also important to make a pledge, a commitment. I've been always very fascinated by the U.S. Court. If you have been in a court in session and you see a witness coming to the witness stand, he or she would always say that, that I will speak the truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. It's interesting, the sequence of the way it's being said, that at first it comes that you are committing to speak the truth and nothing but the truth, and then you're saying, God, help me to keep my commitment. And I think we should really think about this last segment of the surah in the same way. When we say to God that God help us to be on the straight path, to be on a path that is followed by those who are good people, and to stay away from a path that is followed by people who are evil, who promotes falsehood, that we're in a way saying to God that God, we are committing to be on that straight path. We're committing to be on a path to be aligned with people who are good people, who promotes truth and justice, and that we are not going to be aligned with people who promote falsehood, injustice, and faults in the world. And that once we made that commitment, then we're asking God that help us, that we can be on that path. And I think that's really important, how we interpret and how we read some of the verses in the Qur'an, that we understand the essence of it and reflect on it, how to make it practical, how to implement it in our lives, and not just a sort of pronouncement or rituals that you go through. And I would say that every faithful person, every Muslim who reads this Quran, and especially read this surah that you recite every day, that we need to be mindful about what we read and how we practice it. Because if every day we tell God that He is the Lord of the universe, that He is the most merciful, most kind, but then in our daily activity, we are not mindful of God, that we are in our conduct, we're not merciful, we're not forgiving, we're not caring of one another. And that when we said that we wish to worship God, but we don't do that, we don't serve people, we don't seek to help one another. And that, when you say we want to follow the straight path, but in our conduct, in our public square pronouncements, in our quiet moments, we do things totally opposite, then I think we're being unfaithful, even though we might claim faith. So with that, I would like to stop the conversation. I would hope that this short video has given you some understanding of this surah, perhaps reinforced what you already know, perhaps provided some other angles that one can think about. And please, if you like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and also share with your friends, families, and colleagues, and people from all over the world. And the next video, I will be talking about the first 5 verses of Surah Baqarah, which is, I think, would in some way define the purpose of the Quran as also the purpose of our lives, and how we define perhaps Islam, Muslim, and a person of faith. So thank you very much. Please do get a copy of the book, Volume 1, which is in which this first surah is. It is the Volume 1 of my series. The series title is Removing the Middleman, as you know, and the Volume 1 is subtitled Deciphering Faith Without Ritual. That doesn't mean we don't respect ritual, or we are committed to the ritual, but faith has to be defined beyond ritual in terms of values and principles and basics of faith before you get into the rituals, because rituals without foundational understanding is not something that I believe would be acceptable to God or even to our own fellow human being. Thank you very much, and good night.